What do a Renaissance thinker, a CEO, and a touchscreen all have in common? Nothing really. Unless of course you count the Apple Newton. The Newton isn't an Apple product heard about very much anymore, making it all the more interesting when I stumbled across it one day. The general premise of the Newton was to create a portable and easy-to-use computer. Legend has it that John Sculley, the then CEO of Apple, was sitting under a tree when suddenly a Macintosh computer fell on his head, eventually bringing him to the realization that desktop computers are too darn heavy. His solution? Make a flat tablet computer that can be taken anywhere. Steve Sakeman, who had originally been hired under plans of making a Macintosh laptop, was working on the idea of handwriting recognition on computers to replace keyboards. While thinking about creating a handheld computer, Sakeman put the ideas together and formed the Newton development team. Some early designs for the Newton included an A4 paper-sized screen, an internal hard drive, 3 AT&T Hobbit processors, and a $6,000 price tag. Corners were cut to make the device efficient and cheaper, with the rule added by John Sculley that the device would have to fit into his pocket, eventually leading to the Newton team joking about breaking into his house to sew larger pockets in all of his pants. While the hardware began to move in the right direction, software was still behind. Only a few demos were written to test the technology, which were very buggy. Oddly enough, the much-needed handwriting recognition software came from a small development team in Moscow, who called themselves Paragraph. Allegedly, the software was handed over on a floppy in a hotel by a nervous-looking programmer who quickly fled the scene, but not very much points to that story being true, especially considering they had sent to Apple about using their software beforehand. Newton hype was big after a successful demonstration in Chicago, but the device itself was still buggy, and the handwriting recognition wasn't quite there yet. The early Newton was mocked after its 1993 release because of this, a first impression that haunted the Newton until its death in 1997, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple and pulled the plug on the project. As I read further into the Newton, I found that Newton user forums are still up to date, and interestingly, there are plenty of dedicated Newton users still online. It almost felt like coming across some kind of weird cult. After all, how could a 20-year-old device still be used by so many people after so long? Paired with my curiosity for the device itself and its unique interface, I got a Newton MessagePad 2000 to see for myself. The Newton itself has a very clean design and a nice form factor. The wake button on the side is easy to reach, and the screen cover easily flips over to the back when the device is opened. The stylus pen is held in a spring-loaded slot at the top or a retractable inkwell holder in the same place. On the side are two PCM-CIA slots, which can hold ridiculously large memory cards. I think it's fair to say that we've come a long way with regards to storage density. The cards can also include additional hardware, like this Wi-Fi card with a really sleek design. At the top, the Newton has an infrared transceiver for short-range communications and a proprietary port which allows for serial cables and an external keyboard to be plugged in. The sticker on the right shows that this Newton was actually upgraded to be a MessagePad 2100, which only really meant more internal storage. All of this comes together in the weight of about 6 newtons due to the fact that the device uses AA batteries. Pushing the wake button quickly activates the Newton, showing you all of the applications installed on the device on its 16-shade display, which just happens to be the same resolution as the first iPhone. The touch interface works just as you'd expect. Tapping icons with the stylus opens them, lassoing objects selects them, and so on. Text is either input through writing or an on-screen keyboard. The handwriting recognition works well enough, but it's far from perfect, and some letters are almost never recognized correctly the first time. Thankfully, it does learn, and there are a few features that disable handwriting recognition if you don't have the time to correct the Newton's mistakes. The Newton does come with some business and organizational features installed, like an address book, a calendar, and a basic calculator, but on its own it isn't very interesting. Software is sparse on the Newton, however I was able to find a few interesting applications on an online Newton archive. Probably the most interesting was the Newton web browser NetHopper, but there are others like NewtonWorks, which provide office productivity programs, the Macintalk package, which enables the Newton to speak.
Oh, you had trouble with calculus? I did too, when I invented it.
And a Sudoku program, which works nicely with the handwriting input. There are others, of course, but many of them are just simple patches and tweaks to customize the system. My real favorite application for the Newton, though, is drawing on it. The stylus and screen both feel very natural, and the shape recognition feature can clean up a messy sketch very easily with little to no latency. Gestures like scratching out to delete and dragging items to the side to copy and paste make the Newton feel much more efficient than a piece of paper, and were what finally won me over to the Newton. After about a week of using the Newton, I began to notice something a bit bizarre. I began to use the Newton more as a tool than just a toy. The drawing feature makes it good for taking measurements, since I can make a clean vector sketch of an object with the pen and then fill in the dimensions. The handwriting recognition, while definitely slower and less accurate than typing, also makes taking shorter notes more natural and easy to manipulate. Suffice it to say, I now understand why the Newton has a cult following to this day. The Newton is genuinely fun to use. Though as time goes on, getting one to work is becoming more of a challenge. Actually getting the software onto the Newton itself was a rather tricky feat. Plenty of free packages are available online, but the only communication I had available to the Newton was a serial link through a cable that only fit my old Macintosh. After installing the Newton connection software on the Mac, I had to send Newton packages through a string of file translators across multiple machines. The procedure isn't very pretty, and it could be made a lot simpler with the right hardware, like maybe a computer that isn't 10 times slower than the Newton. But in the end, I was still able to download packages and install them on the Newton. Is the Newton still useful today? For most people, I'd say no. It's hard to get set up, on its own it lacks features like wireless connectivity, and a much more functional tablet can easily be found for cheaper. For someone interested in old technology, or even curious about a handwriting-based user interface though, one of the later Newton models are at least worth looking into. Before you go out to buy a Newton, an emulator is available for Android, iOS, and Mac computers, though like any emulator, you miss out on the actual hardware of the Newton, like the stylus and the texture of the touchscreen. Even so, you can at least get the idea of what the Newton is like before buying one. The Newton may be considered a failure since it only lasted for about 5 years of mediocre sales, but it's all too easy to disregard the technology that went into the Newton and what it prompted. The Newton was one of the first PDAs, and it paved the way for modern smartphones. The handwriting software included in the Newton still lives on as Inkwell in OS X, and 10 years after its release, it was still considered to be the best on the market. Probably the biggest contribution the Newton made, though, was developing and popularizing the ARM processor, so even though the Newton line is gone, its heart still beats in nearly all the mobile devices it inspired.